Good morning and welcome to the 11th Regulators and Policymakers Retreat organized by the Independent Park Producers Association of India and Security Watch India here at the Taj Fort Aguada Beach Resort in Goa, India. I have the pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, of introducing to you Mr. William Bryan from the Department of Energy. Welcome to the conference, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bill, we'd like to know, given your long years of experience in understanding how the security environment in a country works, in a developed economy like the United States, where a whole lot of infrastructure and a lot of people's lives, they depend on the availability of energy at the right time, the right amount. Where do you see, Bill, given the fact that times have changed since the late 80s and 1990s, where you don't have a large monolithic block of power anymore, you don't have nuclear tipped missiles ready and aimed at you, and mutually assured destruction anymore, you have terrorism, which can strike from anywhere. It can be even homegrown. There can be people who can be radicalized within. How do you foresee citizens, so William Bryan and his family, his schoolmates, his college mates, his colleagues, protecting themselves or at least, reducing the threat of terror to them somehow?
First, let me put a little context to this. 9/11 was a very defining moment in the United States. When the terrorists struck that day, a lot of activities occurred. And one of them was to stand up the Department of Homeland Security. And the focus within the United States at that time was on protection. How are we going to protect against the next terrorist attack? So a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of investment went into that. We actually developed a national infrastructure protection plan on how we would approach protecting our critical infrastructure. But since 9/11, at least in the United States, we have not had a significant attack on our infrastructure, but we've had over 35 national disasters of significance across the country. Not excluding the fact that terrorism is something to be watchful for, the point is that we've recognized that we have to have an all-hazards approach. If infrastructure is truly critical, and if infrastructure is truly important for the security of the nation, then what damages your infrastructure, what targets your infrastructure is less important than how you're going to respond from that and how you're going to safeguard against all of that. So our philosophy and what you're seeing to adopt across the United States is a philosophy away from protection and more towards resiliency. How can we as a nation be more resilient? How can all of our sectors be more resilient? And what is the role of government and private sector in doing that? And we have formed a very good public-private partnership with industry through a voluntary means to do that. Regulations apply and are adopted when they need to be. And frankly, some regulation is good regulation. And sometimes industry likes regulation because it levels the playing field. All folks are considered equal. They all have to abide by the same regulation. But sometimes regulation can be a hindrance because you need much more than what regulations provide. So our public-private partnership has enabled us to do that and really get to the goal of a more reliable, survivable, and resilient energy system.
Right. So when we're talking about, say, survivability or resilience, we're assuming, like, let's say, the United States, for a large part of the winter, you do require either gas or electricity to keep warm, homes warm. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for people to live. What happens in case of a terrorist strike on energy infrastructure at that point of time? How do households manage to go on for, say, a week? Or if there's a natural disaster that strikes, say, the northern part of North America?
Yeah, actually we do have a Northeast home heating oil reserve. It has never been used. It is 2 million barrels. I believe that's the estimate. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it's about that. But it's never been employed. And there are a lot of, and I don't misunderstand this, but there's a lot of gaming of the system when you have reserves, and you have to be very careful on how you manage reserves, because really the onus is on industry to be able to provide that commodity. And if the government gets in the business of providing too much of a cushion for industry, then they themselves will not stockpile what they need for the season.
Right.
And in essence will rely on the government to provide, and that can falsely or artificially manipulate the economy.
Right.
So we have to be very careful of that. And we do have those shortages, but we also have a reserve to compensate for that. But like I said, we've never had to tap into that. But we're mindful of that and watchful of that. And our number one goal is to make our citizenry as comfortable as possible during those times.
Right. We have had entire underground cities, built to withstand nuclear attacks, where at least a critical part of the U.S. decision-making machinery could operate out of. And this was during the Soviet times. I mean, when the Soviets were around. How has this changed? How is resilience now seen in terms of not just U.S. citizens in the United States, but U.S. citizens abroad?
I can't speak to the underground bunkers that exist for the nuclear side. I believe, though, that as a nation, the people have gotten fairly comfortable with the expectation that energy will be there when they need it. They're not too tolerable to disruptions in that. They like their gas prices consistent. They like to know when they turn on their microwave oven that it's going to work. And I really don't think the average citizen has thought through what would happen if something significant really happened. And that's what we as a government are trying to do. We're trying to think through those scenarios and try to be in a road of prevention and detection to be able to stop those things from happening. And relatively, so far, we've been very successful.